Kombucha.
Today, we're talking all about kombucha. I'm going to show you how to go from this to this to this. Today, it's all about kombucha in the kitchen. Kombucha is one of those things I get a lot of questions about. I've been home brewing my own for the last 5 years or so I've learned a few tips and tricks along the way, which I'm really looking forward to sharing with you. If you have jumped on the kombucha train, then you know it's a little bit sweet, it's a little bit tart and tangy, it's a bit fizzy, and it is super, super good for you because it is a fermented food. So it's full of live bacteria, which are very good for your digestive system. That's why a part of a reason why people have jumped on that train. A lot of people really like that fizzy flavor without having pop, so that kind of gives you that mouth feel as well. There's a lot of reasons to love kombucha. One of the things that may be a little less lovable is the price you pay when you're buying it in the store. So I'm going to show you how easy it is to make it at home for pennies, and I do mean pennies, as opposed to spending a fortune buying it by the bottle at your favorite store. So let's get started and talk about what it is and what you need to brew it. So what is kombucha? Basically, it's a fermented tea. You need a starter, which is some kombucha from a previous batch, so a nice strong bit of kombucha to kind of inoculate that next batch. If you've ever made yogurt, sourdough, anything, you know what I'm talking about. You need a little bit of the last batch to get the next batch really going, and that's super important. Also, a byproduct of that is the SCOBY, and the SCOBY stands for Symbiotic Culture of Bacteria and Yeast, and yes, it's the thing that people are a little bit grossed out to touch. I promise you it's not that bad. We're gonna touch the SCOBY and everything coming up soon. Kombucha is just really simple to make because you need that starter, you need some sugar, you need some tea, and then you need some time. That's all there is to it. So why don't we get straight at it? We are going to start our very first batch of kombucha together right now. So we're gonna get this batch on the go, and you only need a few ingredients to make your kombucha and make it fantastic. The first thing you're going to need is some starter fluid and a SCOBY. So you can get your starter fluid and a SCOBY from someone else who brews kombucha. You can purchase them online. There are different companies that sell them. You can get them, you know what, you can even grow your own SCOBY from store-bought kombucha. But you're going to need, we're gonna do a gallon recipe. So we need 2 cups of starter fluid. So this is the kombucha from my last batch, and my SCOBY, it's put aside right here. We're also going to need some sugar. I'm using regular white, the usual stuff you'll find in your cupboard, white sugar for my kombucha. You can use organic cane sugar as well, whichever you prefer. And the last ingredient, you need some tea. So it's recommended to use a good quality loose leaf. The higher the quality of your tea, the better the quality of your kombucha, but you can absolutely use tea bags as well. It's completely up to you. And finally, you're gonna need some water. So it's a good idea, if you don't have filtered water, to boil your water ahead and let it come to room temperature. That helps to kind of even things out a bit and improve the quality of your ferment. And that goes for any ferment. So Cole's Notes, we're just kind of gonna do this quickly and pretty simply. I have got a glass pitcher here that holds 2 liters, and I make my tea in here first and let it cool, because depending on what you're using to brew your kombucha in, it may not be something that you can pour boiling water in. You might end up with thermal shock where the vessel cracks or breaks, and trust me, 8 cups of sweet tea all over your kitchen is something that you'll be cleaning for weeks, because you'll find it in places you never ever knew it could get to. Do you know how I know? It's happened. So if you've got a glass pitcher that you can use for boiling water, this is a perfect thing. So I'm just gonna use a canning funnel to make sure that I don't make a huge mess, and pour my 1 cup of sugar into the pitcher. And now I'm gonna add my tea. So I'm using a combination of 2 different types of tea in mind because that's how I like it. But when it comes to the tea that you're using, you wanna make sure that it's unflavored. The essential oils and flavorings that are used to flavor your teas can negatively affect the health of your SCOBY. So you want to look for something like an English breakfast or an Irish breakfast if you're looking for a black tea base, maybe a classic sencha for a green, a plain oolong, a plain rooibos, something along those lines. Some people like to use hibiscus as well, so it's completely up to you. I personally really like a combination of English breakfast and classic sencha because I find that it leaves my flavoring options really open at the end. So for this gallon batch that we're doing, oh, that's my oolong that I used the last time. I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of the classic sencha green, and then 1 tablespoon of the English breakfast. So in total, I'm just gonna put a little extra because it wasn't quite full. You need 2 tablespoons of loose leaf tea for this, or if you're using tea bags, you're gonna be looking for about 8 tea bags. Now I'm using an empty tea bag, it's called a steeping sack, to add my tea to. One of the important elements when you're brewing is you don't want to have any stray tea leaves because they'll float to the top of your brew and then you're opening yourself up to possibility of mold. So this is why it's a really good idea to use a tea bag like this if you're using loose leaf, just to make sure that you don't have any little bits or bobs of tea that end up inside your brew. So I'm gonna pop this inside my pitcher and add 8 cups of boiling water. Now I happen to know the size of this pitcher, so I don't actually need to measure it out, but I'm gonna do it just so that you can see. Now I'm gonna let this tea steep for 15 minutes. Now normally that would be way too long. For you to be brewing tea, you'd end up activating all the tannins, it would give the bitter metallic taste. However, kombucha seems to like that. So don't worry about this being strong, that's exactly what you want. Put your timer on for 15 minutes and give this a stir just to help dissolve the sugar. Okay, our tea is cooled and we are ready to assemble the kombucha. I have my 1 gallon jar here, which is going to be my brewing vessel. So this is an old, I think this is, yeah, it's an old sauerkraut jar from a restaurant. These are 1 gallon, they work fantastically. If you're looking for something that's gonna provide you with a few more options when it comes time for bottling, something like this one here, because it has the spigot, makes it easy for bottling. Now when you're looking at a vessel that has a spigot, make sure that the spigot can come apart for cleaning because little scobies grow in there and then they block the spigot and you're not able to use it, so what's the point? So this one, it actually comes apart, makes it easy for cleaning. So I'm going to use this 1 gallon glass jug. I don't need that lid. I definitely don't want a metal lid. You don't want metal anywhere near your SCOBY. So I washed this earlier, it's ready to go. It's really important to wash your vessel in hot, soapy water and rinse it very, very well. You don't need to rinse it with vinegar. It's one of those common misconceptions, just the hottest water that you can manage. One of the reasons why we try to avoid vinegar when we are rinsing our vessel, especially raw vinegar, is raw vinegar can create a strange reaction in your kombucha and you might end up with what's known as vinegar eels. Now these are harmless nematodes. They're not gonna hurt you, but they do look like teeny weeny little tadpoles in here. And yes, they're living. And you know, like I said, they won't hurt you if you drink them. They're not gonna, you know, whatever. But if you put a flashlight up to your kombucha and you see things swimming in it, chances are good you're probably gonna just dump that batch, right? So soap, hot water, well rinsed, you're good to go. You don't need the vinegar. Now, because I made some tea ahead, we are ready to go with our 8 cups of sweet tea. So this is what we made earlier with the 1 cup of sugar, the 2 tablespoons of loose leaf tea, and the 8 cups of boiling water. Let that steep for 15 minutes. Let it come to room temperature, and now I can add it to my vessel. Now at this point, I generally add 4 cups of water. And again, this is water that I boiled ahead and let come to room temperature. If you have a water filtration system, that's great. Some people have no problem with their water, but it's always good to have the best quality water that you can get your hands on when you're doing a fermentation project. Now, at this point, I wash my hands because I'm getting ready to add this starter fluid. So your hands are your tools. You wanna make sure they're super clean, especially when you're gonna be touching the SCOBY, which is gonna go into your kombucha. So a quick second for hand washing. I always dry my hands with paper towel when I'm making kombucha just because I know that it's clean, and you know what, no matter how clean your tea towels are, you never know what kind of bacteria is hanging out on them. So this way I know I'm in good shape. Just a little bit of paper towel, put that to the side. So right now I'm gonna pick up the SCOBY. This is the part that grosses everybody out. I had a woman in a workshop I did describe it like, oh, she said, I could do that. It kind of feels like raw chicken breast. And I'm like, oh, yes. Best description ever. So I also tell you, if you've had children, you've touched grosser things than a SCOBY. And it's very true. I've had 3 boys. Trust me, I can say this with confidence. So this SCOBY is a really lovely light color. I brewed this in an oolong, a plain oolong. So it's the lighter the color of your tea, the lighter the color of your SCOBY and everything else. So you can see how nice and light this is. And I'm gonna turn it around, and don't freak out. Get ready to not freak out. Are you ready to not freak out? You're like, oh my gosh, what the heck is that all over the back of it? This is yeast. This isn't a bad thing. In fact, this is what helps to create that fizz during our fermentation process. So unless you have like tons and tons of it, there's really no reason for you to take it off. It's brown and stringy. It's not the most attractive thing, but it's good for your brew, so don't worry too much about it. So what I do is I kind of just gently, carefully, put my SCOBY inside, and then gently, carefully pour my 2 cups of my starter kombucha in with it. Now at this point, I'm pretty close. It's right at about the shoulders of the jar. I want the jar to be filled to the top, so I'm gonna take some more of this water, and depending on your jar, it could be 2 to 4 cups of water to add in to the jar to bring it right up to about 1 inch from the lip. And that's it. You have just made your first batch of kombucha, and now it just needs a lid and some time. So we don't want to put a metal lid on top of here. When it comes to good health for your SCOBY, you definitely want to make sure that you don't have, because this is acidic, a metal lid on here. It's going to, you know how condensation builds up? You don't want that acidic condensation to build up, eat away at the metal, and then drip into your brew. You also want this to have a breathable cover. My favorite, and I think the easiest thing to use, are coffee filters. As I try to grab 2, there we go. So I double them up and I use 2. They're cheap and easy, they are breathable, and they are so tightly woven that while air escapes, you're not going to end up with dust or, heaven forbid, fruit flies in your brew. So I highly recommend the coffee filter, but you can use a tightly woven You can use a handkerchief or a tea towel. I would recommend that you use something that's brand new that hasn't been around for a while, just because you want it to be as, germ-free as possible, I guess is the best way to put it. This is why I like the coffee filters, because you can reuse them a few times, and then if they get spilled on or something, it's no big hassle to just compost them and put some new ones on. So this is it. We're going to grab an elastic band, put that around the lid, and now I take a marker and I put the date on here. And after that, it's a waiting game. So now the big question is, when is it ready? When can I bottle it? When can I taste it? Really, there's no hard or fast rule, and it's really more up to you than it is anybody else. If you've never brewed kombucha at home before, what I would recommend is that starting at day 7, you start giving it a taste. So if you have a vessel that doesn't have a spigot, you can take this lid off and gently move the SCOBY over to the side and take a little sip with a straw, and then see where it sits on your tongue. Is it sweet still? Does it have any tang to it? There should be a nice balance between the sweet and the tang. You should definitely have some tang in the back of your throat. This isn't sweet tea, guys, it's kombucha. So make sure that you're feeling that balance. And then you taste that every day, starting day 7, until you've got it to where you think you like it. And you know what? Over time, that'll probably change. When I first started brewing kombucha, I liked to bottle it on day 10 or 11. Now I let mine go to about 24 days. I like the more acidic flavor to it, and it gives me better fizz. You're gonna figure out where you fit on that spectrum by tasting it, and I would really recommend keeping a little notebook for the first 6 months that you're brewing to keep track of that, so that way it makes it easier for you when you go get ready to bottle. The next thing we need to do is put this somewhere out of direct sunlight for the next however many days until we're ready to have it bottled. I keep mine on top of my fridge because it's out of the way, and it stays nice and warm up there because of the motor of the refrigerator, but you can keep this wherever seems like a good spot for you. And here we are. We've had that first batch of kombucha. It's been fermenting for as many days as feels right to your palate, and you're like, this is the right flavor. I'm ready to bottle. So this is the fun part. This is where you can add flavors of your own, or you can leave it just as it is. It's completely up to you. So here is my brew that I'm ready to bottle, and let's talk about bottles for a second, okay? So you can use a variety of different bottles. If you're brand new and you only have mason jars, then you only have mason jars. The idea with that is, remember, this is a ferment, so it's going to build up gas, which can build up pressure, which helps with your fizz, but too much pressure means kablooey everywhere. It is difficult to clean your kitchen after one of those. So if you're using mason jars, just don't put the lid nice and tight. When you put that ring on, keep it kind of finger tight, and then every few days you might want to come back and burp them, and we're going to talk about that as well. You definitely want to look for bottles that are either pressure rated or have been tested for kombucha. Again, why? Because fermentation builds gas, which builds pressure, which can go kablooey if you don't have the right vessel. So one thing that you can look for are bottles from specialty companies that specialize in kombucha. You can look at growler bottles. So if you've got a beer drinker in your life, this is great. These are old swing top wine bottles for home brewers. So these are fantastic, pressure rated, right? And last but not least, again, if you have a beer lover in your life, these Grolsch beer bottles are perfect. So you can pick up a 6-pack, have yourself or someone else drink them, and then keep the bottles for your kombucha. Now, with a swing top bottle like this, you've got an airtight seal, which is great for building fizz, but again, we want to watch it. We're going to talk about burping them afterward. These particular bottles that I have a seal on them, but they're not quite airtight. So it takes a bit of practice to be able to really get the fizz going, but they are really nice for, brand new brewers, because you're not going to end up with a, worrisome accident. They will weep on their own and let that excess pressure out. So you might not have the fizziest kombucha, but these might be a good idea just as you're getting started and feeling more confident. It's completely up to you. When it comes time to bottle your kombucha, you have so many options. When it comes to flavoring, you can use anything you like. You can use fresh or frozen fruit. You can use dried spices, like I've got cinnamon sticks and candied ginger here, really good. You can use a flavored tea. So I know we said we couldn't use flavored tea in what's called the first ferment, but this is where that flavored tea can come into play to help flavor your kombucha in what's known as the second ferment. And you can use dried fruit tea. So fruit tea is just a variety of dried fruits and flowers. And because fruit, of course, has a lot of natural sugar in it, this can help with your fizz factor at the end. So whatever your flavoring agent is, you can go savory, you can go sweet, you can do a jalapeno, tomato, and basil if you want. Hello, Bloody Marys. You can have it however you like. I'm more of on the sweet and the spicy side, so these are the flavors that I go for. So we have our jars or our bottles, we have our flavoring agents, so let's get bottling. This is pretty simple, guys. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to give my kombucha a stir. So I've already removed the SCOBY from this batch and 2 cups of kombucha right off the top because that's what I'm gonna use to start my next batch. So if you think of kombucha brewing as a cycle, then you can kind of see how that goes around and around. So once the SCOBY and the 2 cups of starter are removed, the rest is ready for me to make into kombucha. I give it a stir to help redistribute any yeast that's kind of settled to the bottom. If you don't do that, sometimes you can end up with a very fizzy bottle of booch and then the next bottle has like no fizz whatsoever, so that really helps. Now I'm gonna grab some bottles and start adding my flavoring agent. And you can do this. I'm just gonna try to smoosh these fruit pieces in. There's some cherries in here, strawberries, and pomegranate pips, so that's gonna be delicious. And when it comes to how much to put into each bottle, that's kind of an individual choice. With fresh fruit, I add more. When I'm going for dried, I usually stick to about a teaspoon per bottle. I love this cinnamon and ginger combo, and the sugar from the candied ginger really makes a big difference in the fizz factor. Always important. So I save bigger pieces of whatever I'm using to flavor for these wider mouth bottles. And then I use the smaller tea or different pieces for the other bottle. So I'm gonna add a teaspoon of this yummy flavored tea. It's a strawberry flavored green tea. So now that all my bottles have their flavoring agent in them, I'm gonna get ready to add the kombucha. Now, unfortunately, this has a spigot on it, but the spigot doesn't come apart to clean. So it has like SCOBY buildup in there and I cannot use the spigot anymore, it's blocked. So I'm just going to pour the kombucha into a measuring cup and start pouring it into my bottles. My bottles are all filled. Now, because I'm using different size bottles, I didn't get quite enough to fill this last one, but that's okay. It's still gonna be delicious. You'll notice that I have a very, very small headspace on these bottles that are not airtight. And that's just because the more air, it makes it harder to get some fizz. So right now, this is just gonna help a little bit with the fizz factor. So you can see that I filled these up fairly high. Another tip that you can use to add to the fizz factor is you can add a little bit of sugar at the bottling stage, but a ½ teaspoon per bottle is great. And what that does is it just gives this fermented tea something else to eat, because that's what it's doing. And when it eats, it builds up that gas, it ferments some more, you get more fizz. See where I'm going with that? The swing top bottles you don't want to have as high of a headspace. You want to give them a good inch in there because that air does not have, or that gas has nowhere else to go, right? So at this point, once you have your flavors, you've bottled, what you can do is just put them on the counter for about 2 or 3 days and then put them in the fridge. So what this does is it allows it to, once again, build up some more fizz. It allows that flavor to really steep into your bottles. And then by putting them in the fridge, the cold in the refrigerator slows the fermentation process down dramatically. It doesn't stop it, it just really slows it down. So this way you can kind of capture the flavor a little bit, and depending on how long you leave them in the fridge, that'll depend on if the flavor changes as time goes on, if it becomes a bit more tart. But this is just how simple it is. So I'm gonna put these guys away on my counter for about 3 days. Now for these ones that are airtight, you may want to burp them. And what does that mean? You're like, what? So burping them just means that you're just gonna open them like literally for like a second. Oh, I've opened it and I've closed it. Like barely any time at all. Just enough to allow some excess gas to escape so that it doesn't build up too much pressure. Have you ever seen those geysers of kombucha? They look impressive, but if you've done all this work and you end up with this much kombucha to drink, is it really that impressive in the long run? Maybe not. Size doesn't always matter when it comes to these sorts of things, right? Here I've got a bottle of kombucha that I bottled about 4 days ago that's been sitting on my counter. So let's enjoy it, shall we? At this point, I just use a tea infuser and put it into the cup of my choice. And I open up my bottle and I give I've used a fruit tea in this one, so I just kind of give it a little stir because otherwise it plugs it up a bit. And you can see that I've got some fizz there. At least I hope you can see it. I'm gonna just pour this in. And this way it strains it as I pour. I'm a big fan of some fizz, but not too much. And this is perfect. And that's how easy it is. Cheers. That is so good. So we went basically from this to this, and in total it was less than a month for me from making the kombucha, getting that started like I did with you here earlier, and then bottling it and letting it rest for a few days on the counter. I hope this has been helpful. I hope you've enjoyed. If you have any questions, always just ask. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe and leave me a comment. Let me know what you like and what you'd like to see more of. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate you very much. Happy booching.